Hi everybody, welcome to Potawatomi Pathways. This is a history program from the Raupp Museum in Buffalo Grove. My name is Debbie Fondre. I'm the museum curator and I'm the one who will be talking to you today. Meet the Potawatomi. The Potawatomi were the most recent group of Native Americans to live in this area of northern Illinois. They lived here until 1833, which was not quite 200 years ago. They were not the only Native Americans to live here, but they were the most important in this area at that time. If you look at the timeline, you can see what was going on when the Potawatomi lived here. They lived here before the United States even became a country, and they lived here when Illinois became a state. How do we know that the Potawatomi lived here? Are they still here today? Nope. Did we dig up a Potawatomi village in Buffalo Grove? Nope. It's okay to ask a museum how they know what they know. And we know from many different sources. First of all, we know from maps. We have maps from 200 years ago that show where the Potawatomi were living. And this part of Illinois is on those maps. Second, we know from stories that parents told kids, told grandkids, told great-grandkids, told great-great-grandkids, all the way down to now. Third, we know from journals. We have old books that were written by people traveling in Illinois at that time, and they talk about seeing and meeting the Potawatomi. It's really cool. And last, we actually know from language. This is awesome. Even though the Potawatomi have been gone from this area for about 200 years, you actually speak the Potawatomi language today. How cool is that? That is because Chicago is a Potawatomi word. 300 years ago, Chicago was a Potawatomi settlement. There were already Potawatomi living there. Now, there weren't cars and trucks and buses and sports teams and buildings like there are today. There were only a lot of two things: wild onions and wild leeks. And you know what? That's what Chicago actually means in the Potawatomi language. Place where the wild onions grow. Isn't that fun to know? There are other names in Illinois that are also from the Potawatomi language. Waukegan, Aptakisik, and Milwaukee are also all Potawatomi words. But they're not my favorite word. My favorite word in the Potawatomi language is the Potawatomi word for house, and that word is wigwam. Try saying it fast. Wigwam. All about wigwams. How could the Potawatomi build a house? Could they drive a truck to the store and bring back wigwam supplies? No. I'm being silly. The Potawatomi used natural resources to build wigwams. They would use things they found in the environment, things from nature. What would you use to build a wigwam? Try thinking like a Potawatomi. Would you use sticks and branches? How about other parts of trees? Maybe leaves? Would you use animal furs? You know what? Good job. Now let's see how it would work. Building a wigwam. We'll go step by step. Step 1. You needed small trees, flexible trees called saplings. And that's because you would bend the tree trunk into the shape of the wigwam. You can see a wigwam is a circle shape. That's going to be important. Step 2. You can't use logs for the walls because logs won't bend in a circle, so you need something else. And the Potawatomi would use cattails, those grasses that you see by lakes and ponds today. And they would pick lots and lots of cattails and lay them flat and weave them into cattail mats. Then they would wrap them around one side of the wigwam and tie them on, and the other side of the wigwam and tie them on, to make the walls of the wigwam. Step 3, we need a roof, right? For that, the Potawatomi would use bark, the outside part of the tree, and they would take small pieces of bark and then sew them together into bigger pieces of bark and even bigger pieces of bark until you had a roof for the wigwam. But what if you had bad weather? That's step 4. The Potawatomi would take larger branches and put them along the outside of the wigwam so that if you did have bad weather, everything would still stay together and stay put. We're missing one more thing though, aren't we? We're missing a door. And for that, the Potawatomi would use deer hide. There would be deer hide for the door. Okay, now we have the wigwam. Are you curious about what's inside the wigwam? Inside the wigwam. This shows a top view of the wigwam and lots of the things that are inside of it. And there are all sorts of things. First of all, things to do with food. So you can see there's a bark basket with maize. Maize is corn. There's a hearth with a clay vessel. That's for cooking your food. And there are grasses. Next, somewhere to sleep. There would be a sleeping platform with a fur covering. So you would use extra deer hides for a bed. Last, animal furs. You didn't just use furs for the bed, you had extra furs. And I want you to remember that because later on we might see a way to use them. Now let's talk about food. The Potawatomi had 3 different ways to get food. We'll start with the easiest. Gathering was the first way to get food. Gathering means going out into the field or the forest and picking things that are good to eat. Birch bark baskets were great for gathering food. And what kind of food do you think the Potawatomi found? They would find blueberries and raspberries and wild grapes. They would be able to pick mushrooms and black walnuts. And here's a surprising one. The Potawatomi picked acorns. They didn't eat them raw though. Instead, they would take the acorns, roast them over the fire, and then grind them up to make acorn pancakes. Doesn't that sound good? Farming. That was another way to get food. The Potawatomi also grew their own food in gardens. The 3 most important crops in the garden were corn, beans, and squash. Can you see all of them in the picture? Look for 3 different shaped leaves. Why do you think these crops were important? They were important because you could eat them right away, but also you could dry them out and save them for the winter. That's what this picture shows. You can see the corn being dried, and those circles are squash that have been sliced and now they're being dried so that they can be eaten later on. Here's another fun one. The Potawatomi also grew watermelon. Isn't that a neat thing to know? Hunting. The Potawatomi also ate meat. That meant that they had to hunt for animals. What kind of animals do you think the Potawatomi hunted? Remember, they were living in Illinois. So they hunted deer and buffalo and wild boar, that's a kind of wild pig, and rabbits and squirrels and even bears, because we had bears living in Illinois at that time. They would also hunt birds like ducks and geese, and they would fish for fish. In fact, they even went ice fishing in the winter. But animals are fast. They do not want to be killed by a hunter. In order to be good hunters, the Potawatomi needed tools to help them hunt. They needed a bow and arrows. Time to eat. Would the Potawatomi eat with their fingers right out of the cooking pot? No, of course not. They They would have bowls and spoons just like we do today, but with a few differences. Let's look at the spoon here and figure out what the differences are. First of all, you can see the spoon is made out of wood. These were carved by the Potawatomi from trees. It was one more example of why trees were important. Second of all, even though you had to make your own spoon, you can see the Potawatomi still were able to decorate things. That handle is carved like an owl. The Potawatomi used natural resources to make things that were special as well as useful. Isn't that interesting? Potawatomi clothing. The Potawatomi used animal hides to make their clothing. Those were the furs we saw earlier on in the wigwam. A pair of boys' leggings would look like this. And animal hides are great, but there's one problem. Most animal hides are brown all the time. Would you like decorated clothes? The Potawatomi did too, and they used something surprising to make it happen. This animal, the porcupine. Looking at a porcupine, you wouldn't think about clothes, would you? Especially if you look at the porcupine needles. They look sharp. But the Potawatomi took those porcupine needles and turned them into art. They flattened them out and wove them into leather to make designs. That was called quill work. You can see it on the bag. Those stripes and those birds, those are all made out of porcupine quills. Isn't that awesome? Quill work was art, but do you think it was hard or easy? Would it be nice to have another way to decorate clothes? What do you see? What does it mean? Look at the Potawatomi ladies in this picture and look at the clothes they were wearing. Could the Potawatomi ladies make the clothes you see in this picture? Could they make the flowered shirt or the bright red blanket or the ribbons? They couldn't, could they? Those are nice, but they're not things that come from nature. They're not things you can make only with natural resources. So what happened? The answer might surprise you. The Potawatomi went shopping. They did. 200 years ago, when they were living here, the Potawatomi were not alone. There were also European traders who ran trading posts. A trading post was like a store. Inside a trading post. This is what it looked like on the outside. A trading post was like a store. Inside the trading post would be things that the Potawatomi might want. Let's look. There's lots of things on the shelves, aren't there? There's cloth to make clothes, like the shirts the Potawatomi ladies were wearing. There's metal traps to catch animals. That would help in hunting. There's silver jewelry. There's a tin pail. There's wool blankets to keep warm. There's even glass beads to decorate clothes. Okay. How do you think the Potawatomi paid? What did they have to trade? A trading post only works when people have things to trade to get what they want. And what the Potawatomi traded is in this picture too. Have you guessed? Can you see it? The Potawatomi would trade furs, especially this fur. That's beaver fur, and that was one of the most valuable furs of all. Did the Potawatomi have fun? They sure did. They would play games just like we do. In fact, one of the games they played was lacrosse. Lacrosse was invented by Native Americans. People have been playing lacrosse since before we were a country. And the Potawatomi had pets. In fact, the Potawatomi word for dog is numosh. Okay, where did the Potawatomi go? In the 1830s, the government wanted farmers to move to this area of Illinois. The farmers wanted to farm, but they did not want to share the land with the Potawatomi. So in 1833, the government made the Potawatomi sign the Treaty of Chicago. A treaty is an agreement between people to do something. The Potawatomi made a deal to move from Chicago to Iowa. The people in Iowa did not want to share land with the Potawatomi either, so the Potawatomi moved again. They spent time in Missouri, and then they moved to a reservation in Kansas. After that, some of the Potawatomi stayed in Kansas on the reservation, and some moved to different land in Oklahoma. There are Potawatomi in Oklahoma and in Kansas today. Are there Potawatomi today? Yes, there are. There are over 40,000 Potawatomi people living in different states. They have government buildings and schools and museums. Sometimes they have festivals where everyone dresses in traditional clothing. But most of the time, they dress in modern clothing and look just like you and me. The only way you would know someone was a Potawatomi is if you asked them or if they told you. That's the end. Thank you for listening and have a very good day. If you have any questions, email us. Otherwise, thanks again.